how to do 50's wiring in an SG with coil splits. Okay, so I'm doing this video because throughout the past 4 or 5 years of trading as 6-string supplies, it's one of the most requested subjects we do. How would you do 50's wiring in a Gibson style guitar with coil splits? And the reason why I've chosen SG is because A, someone ordered it this week, and B, I've done a video in the past on how to wire an SG, but my technique has improved considerably, or changed I should say, in that time. So I guess you could see it as an updated way on how to do SG wiring anyway. Okay, with no further ado, just give you a quick overview. So I've got CTS 500k audio pots. I'll be using those for the volume controls. I'm going to be using coil splitting as my tone control. So here we have 500k audio pots push-pull. Obviously it's an SG, so I've got a Switchcraft right angle toggle switch, and it's got the deep threaded nut to ensure that it fits through the body. I've got a longer threaded jack socket, so if you're putting it through a traditional Gibson SG and the jack socket is therefore going through the top of the body, you need the socket which has got the longer thread. So I'll be using that. I've got 0.022 capacitors. It's one of those questions, isn't it? Do you want to use 0.047 or 0.022? Generally, I'll just stick with that, 0.022. If you're going to be using coil splitting non-stop, then I suppose you should probably look at getting a single coil guitar instead. Braided wire, I'll be using the typical Gibson style. This is Gavitt braid. Tin copper for fun, as we always do. And this is a bit of a travesty. This is all the rubber tubing I've got left. Unfortunately, the virus has my supply. I'm really picky with rubber tubing, believe it or not. And my main supplier is out of stock for 2 weeks ago. He said 6 weeks, so at least another month, let's say. I've got some on order from eBay, but it's not here yet due to slow post. Okay, so oh yeah, and obviously a couple of templates. You can do this in your guitar, but trust me when I say it's a lot easier to wire it outside first, then just drop it in. And I've got a special template here just for the switch, which I'll get into in a second. I'll just give you a quick overview. We have done this a few times in the past, but obviously if you're a new subscriber, I'll just go through it again. So on a classical Switchcraft L-shaped toggle switch, which is what this is, the fat lug in the middle here, the beefy one, that is the ground lug. Either side are the outputs to the volume controls. So typically this side is what will be going to the neck volume control. This side is what will be going to the bridge volume control. And the two at the bottom are the output to the jack socket, the main output. So what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze those two together and we're going to put a wire through. But we're going to start off just by doing a bit of work on the ground lug. So as I say, that's the fat beefy one in the middle there. Just take a length of tinned copper. Really does not need to be much, especially as we only have one bit of braided wire. So what's that, a couple of inches? Yep, turn on your soldering iron. That would be a good point to start. Oh, turn on the plug. That turns on the soldering iron. Waste time by drinking coffee whilst the soldering iron heats up. I don't have kids, by the way, but I do have a cat, hence the mug. Okay, so I've just been doing that off camera. I've just tend to bend the hook it around a little bit like that so that it goes into the lug nice and easy. So put that through the ground lug and then solder that into place. Just like so, let it cool. And then you guys know me well enough to know that I'm going to cover that lug with some rubber tubing, completely unnecessarily, but there we are. Okay, and as I was saying at the beginning, going through the components, I'm going to be using braided wire coming from the switch, grounding the 4 pots together and going straight to the jack. So essentially, with this one length of wire, and it's a foot in total, but we'll be using a bit less than that, we are grounding the whole circuit and having the main live signal from the switch to jack, which is why Gibson style, braided wire like this is so popular. Okay, so next on the switch, we're going to bend these 2 lugs at the bottom together. Just like that. And thread the braided wire, the inner lug, the inner cloth wire of the braided wire through the 2 lugs. We're going to solder them into place. Like so. Push the cloth back down, and again, completely optional, but you know I'm going to do it. Just cover that connection there with some rubber tubing. I always think it looks really neat on this type of switch because you can't actually do it on the typical Les Paul style toggle. Okay, now this is the essential bit. Push the braid back down. Now, even though that tubing's there, so that tubing, what that tubing does, apart from looking pretty and stopping the wire from fraying, it stops the outer braid. Where's my pokey? It stops the outer braid of that. Well, this is essentially the ground, and it stops that from coming into contact with those, which is what causes a short. So, whilst I use tubing because it looks pretty, there is a genuinely good reason behind it as well. Okay, so next, that tinned copper that we put in the ground, we're just going to wrap that around the braid a couple of times. Nothing too extravagant though. I'm just going to try and get that a little bit closer down. So I've just wrapped that round fully twice, which is more than enough. And then we're just going to solder that. Solder the tinned copper to the braid. Not like that. Just like that. So that's soldered in place. Next, we'll move on to the main harness. Just to show you what I've done here, so basically, as you're probably aware, we need to ground the outer braid of this wire. It needs to be connected to each pot as it goes through towards the jack socket, and that's how we ground the 4 pots together. You can, of course, just run it straight to the jack and use a separate wire to connect the 4 pots like you do in a Les Paul. A lot of people do that, but I've always done it this way, just using one piece of wire. So I've just wrapped it round the pot basically, and then bent the lugs back in to keep it in place, because I just need to solder this to the side of the pot casing. So when you're soldering braid to the pot casing, doesn't matter if you're doing it on top or on the bottom, it's generally a good idea if you've got a temperature adjustable soldering iron to have it at high heat. I'm just gonna try and just like that. And because you've got your soldering iron on a much higher heat than you normally would, it doesn't take long at all. And if you're worried about burning the pots, try and use a good quality pot, because if you're rewiring an SG, you want to put the best stuff in anyway. But it's always better to have high heat for a shorter period of time than it is for low heat for a longer period. Just think of slow roasted beef or something like that. The longer you're down there for, the longer it cooks. Okay, and we're doing exactly the same on the bridge volume control. It's the same process. Just try and hold it in place. Now, because you've already actually soldered it, braided wire is quite good at staying in place like that. Sorry, keep you guys able to view at all times. So as you can see there, I've just bent it around. Because you've already soldered it to one side, it does stay in place quite nicely. So again, I've gone in at high heat. Flow in a bit of solder as the heat spreads. Just like so. Okay, and as we always do, we need to ground wherever my pokey is. We need to ground these 2 lugs on the volume controls, just like you do in any circuit. So we're going to fill the eyelet with solder, bend it to the back of the pot, and solder it into place. Just going to lower the temperature now. So again, just fill the eyelet and do exactly the same on the bridge volume control. Let that cool and just bend it back like so. And we'll solder that in place. A lot of people don't like the way I do this, the bending back, because you can of course just use a length of wire. It doesn't matter if you're going to cut off the capacitor lead, feed it through like so, solder it in place. A lot of people do it that way. I find this way a lot cleaner. The argument against the way I do it is that if you do want to change things further down the line, it's a lot harder to do. But I mean, I guess I charge 90 quid for an SG harness, 85 quid, which I'm guessing is about $100. I don't know, depending on the exchange rate. If you're spending that much on a harness, why would you want to be changing it? That's my argument anyway. Anyway, enough rambling. Then we're going to solder that into place as well. Okay, next we'll move on to the actual coil splitting the push-pull pots. Okay, so for the push-pull tone pots, we just need to make two very simple connections that is identical on each pot. So, if you watched any of our previous videos on coil splitting, and to be fair, we've done a few, so this will be the last one for a long time. So basically, we need to connect C2 to ground, which is that hole there. So as you can see, I've just got a jumper wire connecting the whole C2 to ground. And obviously this is 50's style Les Paul wiring, even though it's in an SG. So we're going to be grounding the middle lug of each respective tone pot, and we're going to put that to ground as well on the sides of the pot. Now, the only difference between the two is one of them is being grounded on that side, and I've got the other wire for the middle lug of the this is going to be the bridge tone push pull on the other side. And now the only reason I'm doing this, you don't have to do it at all, is because when these are back in place, I like to have them on the outside, simply because I'm going to have to ground this braid to the side of the push pull pots. And if there's already a connection in the way, it's a bit of a ball ache. Okay, so we'll put these into the circuit, and then we'll ground them together with the braid, and then we'll move on to the jack and the capacitors. Okie dokie, so I put the push-pull pots back in place, and then you'll see that I've got a length of rubber tubing, this black tubing here, just to cover the braid as it runs through the main cavity there, just to stop it touching any of these lugs on the pots that it shouldn't be touching. And again, really, as per previous, we need to ground the outer braid of the braid to each pot as it runs by. So I've just it doesn't matter which way you do it, you can do this one first, then that one. I've always tended to do this one first, then it runs down here before running out to the jack, which we'll get to in a second. So I'm just going to, oops, excuse me, I'm just going to put that in place there. I'll zoom in as much as I can, but I do need the angle myself for soldering. Yeah, sorry, you probably won't be able to see this very well. Like so. And again, we're just gonna, now this one you will be able to see properly. Just gonna run that to the pot casing. Heat it up for a second. just like that. And again, next we're going to use a bit of tubing just to cover the, there's no need to actually, but just to cover the braid as it runs. Sorry, I'll zoom out again. Just as it runs around here, and then we'll put in the jack socket. Okay, so moving on to the jack sockets. As I was saying at the beginning of the video, we're using the longer threaded jack as opposed to, on the left here we've got a standard Switchcraft jack, and on the right is the, it's just called the longer thread version. Does what it says on the tin. The reason being, if your jack socket is going through the top of your guitar, like on a ES335 or an SG style, or it doesn't matter, any guitar with the jack's going through the top, you'd use this. If your jack socket is of course going through the side, and a lot of models do this nowadays, so it's only going through a jack plate, you can just use a standard jack, in which case you would need a bit more wire here. But for this instance, we're using the longer thread. It's going into a classical SG style. Now, we've explained this numerous times, but I'll do it again for any first time viewers. The inner ring here, this lug here, the one that's got a Switchcraft embossed on it, is the ground lug. And the other, the tip here is the hot or signal lug. So what we're going to do, because we're working with braided wire, you need to separate the braid from the inner cloth. So I've done it just by cutting down the length of the braid, twisting it all together, and then cutting it off here so it's got this ledge. And obviously, as explained, I've got a bit of tubing here, which is completely optional, you don't need it whatsoever. But it's always a good idea to put tubing on this section. So cut another piece of tubing and run it up the tube, the wire, and just leave it out the way for now. So we are going to connect the inner cloth wire, so push the cloth back. And as I say, that's going to this solder tip here. So thread it through, bend it round, preferably without as much drama as I've just caused. Okay, and then solder that into place. Like so. Push your cloth wire back down, and then that small length of tubing here that we put back up the wire, we'll push that all the way back down just to cover that lug. Perfect, just insulates the joint and stops that connection coming in contact with any ground. Heat it down, boom, that's sorted. That's hot. Then bend this back down, and the outer braid, that small ledge that we created earlier that I've just got here in my finger, we're going to put that through the ground lug, and again we're going to solder that into place. Bend it round to hold it in place, and then solder. Like so. That's your jack circuit done. Now we'll finish off the switch. We'll need to connect the switch to the volume controls, and then we'll put in the capacitors. Alright, so just to finish off the toggle switch, I'm using yellow cloth wire. You can use any wire you want, doesn't have to be cloth wire. And all we are doing is quite simply connecting this lug to the middle lug, and exactly the same, so that each respective lug of the switch goes to the output or the middle lug of each volume control. So I'll do one and then we'll do the other one off camera. So I feed it through and bend it round just to make a mechanical connection. And then solder that in place. Not needed, but I do it as a habit. Just cover that with some tubing. And then you can do it either way you want, but I'll always do it this way. I have the wire going underneath and back up. You can just go straight across there. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever on that sort of distance. Cut the wire to length. Push the cloth back, and you'll notice the reason why I'm doing this out of the template is because, well, exactly that reason. I go underneath, and you can't really do that when there's a template in the way. And then do exactly the same for the other side of the switch, and then we'll move on to the capacitors, and I'll show you how to hook up your pickups. Our capacitor is running from the middle lug, that's the output of the volume control, and it's going down and across to the lower lug on the tone control. So that's middle, down and across. I know these are at a funny angle, but you know what I mean. And exactly the same on the neck controls, middle, down and across here. So I'll just use the diagram on the screen if you get lost. I'll try and give you guys a decent enough view, however. just like that. Okay, I'll do the next one, and then we'll move on to, I'll show you how to put the pickups in. Now I'll just show you where you put your pickups. You need 4 conductor wire humbuckers to use this setup. I won't actually be doing it because this is being shipped out to a customer as is. So let's assume I'll start off with Seymour Duncan, and then we'll move on to Gibson as well, and any other pickups you'll need to use the relevant coding chart to work out what goes where. So your north start, so for Seymour Duncan, north start is the black one, and that is going into the input lug of each respective volume control as normal. No change there. So that one goes there. Your north finish and your south finish, so these are the coil split, the coil tap wires. So for Seymour Duncan, that is white and red. They both get soldered together. And in a normal setup, you take them off, but obviously as we are coil splitting, so they are going into, again, use the diagram on your screen, hole number 3 on the push-pull pot. It's a bit tricky because they're hidden under there, but it's basically on a push-pull pot, it's the lower left lug, number 3, as you can see there. Now, as these are CTS, we're putting them into the hole. So find the hole labeled number 3, and put your coil tap wires in there. And so that's your white and the red for Seymour Duncan, north finish and the south finish. If you're using Gibson, that is the white and green. Otherwise, everything else stays the same. So your south start, again, for Seymour Duncan, that will go, is green, that will go to ground with the ground wire. And for Gibson, the south start is black, which is confusing because black is the north start for Seymour Duncan, but for Gibson, the black is ground. That will go to ground there. So like I say, guys, use the diagram on your screen. That's it really. So it's a really nice, it's quite a nice setup. Some people would rather have it on the volume controls. The only reason why we do it on the tone controls, really, from a personal point of view, I don't use the coil tapping that often. So I guess a little bit of psychology. If they're on the tone controls, I probably wouldn't use them as much. But again, from a customer point of view as well, it's a lot easier to install this way around. If you've got the push pulls and the volume positions, it's a lot harder to do, in my personal experience and opinion. Anyway, that's it, guys. Thank you very, very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll see you real soon in the next video.